I'm Jake Wise. I chose to do a lecture on the Tokugawa isolation because I chose Japan as my civilization for the game that we've been playing through the course of this semester. But this was basically when Japan closed its doors and became a closed country. This lasted for over 200 years, about 250 years, from 1603 to 1853. Understanding Sakaku and its legacy will be today's lecture title. Let's get into it. So, basically, we founded a shogunate. I don't know how to pronounce these words, but I'm going to try my best. But we found one that would rule for over 250 years. Early Tokugawa rulers faced foreign influence, especially from Christian missionaries, because there was a lot of those over there, and European traders. Now, basically, they didn't want this influence. They wanted to be their own country. They wanted to come up with their own kind of culture. And so in response to these missionaries and traders being there, they decided to close their borders to honestly pretty much the whole world. I mean, there was a select few of people and countries that they didn't care to, but pretty much the whole world. But this policy was known as Sakaku or Sakaku. I don't know, but that just means closed country, and that lasted until 1853. And this lecture asks, why did Japan isolate itself, and what did it gain or lose by doing so? And I think right off the bat you can tell they kept themselves from having influence from other countries, and they wanted to do their own thing, and that's why they did it. But we are going to find out through the course of this little lecture. Alright, here are some of the reasons that they decided to go into isolation. So as we know, the rulers were concerned about foreign influence, especially Christianity, which had been getting people to convert in Kyushu, which was a city part of Japan. But when they were seeing people convert to Christianity, they were scared that they might lose a lot of people to that. And they didn't want this outside influence right away. They wanted to create their own identity. They wanted to have their own thing going, like I said. Another reason, well, this wasn't really a reason, this was just an outcome, but the 1614 edict banned Christianity, and then missionaries were expelled or executed as well, which, I mean, they had to do what they had to do, but looking at that as an American Christian, that's crazy. But they were still just trying to create their own identity. The 1637 to 38 Shimabara rebellion was led partly by Christian peasants and confirmed fears of foreign instigated uprisings. And then there was also competition between Portuguese, Dutch, and English traders, which also made foreign relations unpredictable. So they just kind of didn't know what to do. They were trying to do their own thing. They wanted to stay out of trouble from the looks of it, and they just wanted to create their own identity and their own culture without the influence of other countries. Alright, so we've talked about the reasons for isolation. Now we're going to talk about the policy, the Sakaku policy in particular. So this is basically what these people had to go through that lived in Japan. So by 1639, Japan had banned all European contact except for a single Dutch trading post on Dejima. Dejima was a small artificial island in Nagasaki, so it was built by man, and it was just a little trading post kind of deal. I mean, really, I mean, it was a little tiny town, but they had a trading post, and they kept good relations with Japan, I guess. So I didn't really figure out what the reasoning for that specific trading post staying in contact with them was, but yeah. Also, Japanese citizens were forbidden from traveling abroad, so as a citizen of Japan, you could not have gone anywhere except where you were. Man, that was all you really were allowed to do. So, I mean, kind of like the people living there at the time probably felt like Truman from the Truman Show, just being kept in a bubble, not really be able to go anywhere. But, I mean, at least they realized they were there. Also, the shogunate maintained control over foreign influence to protect political stability and national sovereignty. And, yeah, I mean, it seemed like the shogunate was the guy who kind of called all the shots here. He was their president, you know. So whatever he said went, pretty much. And in this time, they were closed. They couldn't, nobody could come in, nobody could really go out. Now let's talk about the impacts on trade and economics. So, despite isolation, Japan's internal economy thrived, which is surprising. You really wouldn't think so, because in a class I was in, which you might know a lot about, Caribbean history, trade was what really kept these little countries alive, and they were all little islands, and that's what Japan was back then. They weren't very big. I mean, this was the 1600s, so without that trade you'd expect. But merchants traded rice, sake, paper, and silk across the country. So across the country, they just internally traded. It was crazy. Like, I mean, that's not what you would think. Urban centers like Edo, which is now Tokyo, Osaka, and Kyoto grew rapidly. So with this trade, I mean, they were figuring out how to make it work, especially in these big cities. The Dutch and Chinese continued to bring limited foreign knowledge through Rangaku. Yeah, that's the best I could give you on that one. So we know that they thrived as an economy and with trade and such. So there's really nothing going wrong here. But let's talk about how the culture and the social aspect of Japan developed over this time. So the Edo period was culturally rich. Kabuki theater, woodblock prints, haiku poetry, and samurai ethics flourished. So everything was going good for them right here. They kept a strict social hierarchy. They maintained that, with samurai at the top, followed by peasants, artisans, and merchants. Which is crazy. You would think peasants would be on the very bottom, but not in this case, I guess. And one great thing that came out of this, besides all the other great things that have come out of this that we've learned so far, is that education improved, especially among the samurai and merchant classes. Which is crazy because the merchant were bottom of the barrel. They weren't kept at a high social hierarchy there. So that's very surprising. And from this point in the lecture, it does seem like Japan was doing very good through this isolation period. Now, we have technological stagnation and isolation, which doesn't sound good, so let's get into that. Isolation helped maintain peace, but it also caused Japan to fall behind in industrial and military technology. But as them being isolated, they might not have even thought about needing a military to be, too good, because they probably weren't thinking about getting into a war or anything. They weren't talking to anybody, so they had no reason to be fighting with anybody. But their industrialization was stagnant, as the title of this slide shows, and their military was not growing very good. While Europe underwent the scientific and industrial revolutions, Japan remained pre-industrial, which, in some cases, some would argue, especially me, that some of that pre-industrialization, like those building techniques, were pretty solid. I mean, look at the Great Wall of China. That's all brick. That's just hand built, baby. I mean, that thing is solid. It's been there forever. Look at the pyramids. I mean, some of those techniques were very impressive. That I would almost say that some of that stuff was a lot more sturdy than what has come through industrialization. Now, I'm looking at a house and it's 2025. This is the 1600s, so I wouldn't think that the house that I'm in right now is sturdier than the houses that came from industrialization in the 1600s. So I think sticking with those brick and mortar kind of techniques probably weren't the worst idea, but it did cause them to fall behind altogether. They really just prioritized order of like social class and such over innovation. So that's one of the bad things that did come out of this, aside from all the good things that we've learned about so far. Now let's get into the end of isolation, if I can find my mouse. There it is. Alright. In 1853, Commodore Matthew Perry arrived with U.S. warships, demanding that Japan open its ports. Now this is 1853, so it's been 250 years since this whole thing started. The shogunate, unable to resist, signed unequal treaties. But, you know, U.S. probably, I mean, those warships were probably a lot, well, not a lot, but a million times better than what Japan had, and there was no way that if the U.S. opened fire, I don't think Japan would have been able to, you know, hold off. So they had really no choice but to sign. This began the end of the Tokugawa period and led to the Meiji Restoration in 1868, which is another great topic which I've read a lot about recently, and that's something else I would love to do another slide on. Now, why does it still matter? So Japan's Sakakaku period influences modern identity, balancing tradition with modernization. Now, like I said, a big part of this isolation was to keep themselves from being influenced too much from other countries. And even today, Japan is known for its cultural uniqueness and controlled international influence. Like, they don't want to be influenced too much. But this policy taught us that they could preserve culture. And even with that, you might still progress as a country. Now, in some aspects they didn't, but in some aspects, like what really matters as a culture did. And I think that's really all they cared about at this time. They didn't care about how modern their country was. I mean, that comes with time anyway. They could figure that out. So, I mean, you look at Japan now, dude, and it's one of the most modern countries. If you go, I mean, like, look at this picture of Japan on the bottom left there. That's insane. You don't see that in America. Like, they came along. They did great. So I think for their culture and for this country, this helped them a lot. And I think it has made Japan one of the most unique countries and most, like, everybody wants to visit it. So I think that all came with this. Well, let's just get into the conclusion and wrap this up here. The Tokugawa period's isolation was a calculated move for peace, unity, and control. It helped Japan develop internally, but left it vulnerable when global powers advanced. Those are the two biggest points here. So the one question I want to leave you with here is it wise for a country to isolate itself from the world? Why or why not? That's something to think about, and with all this information you've learned, that might be pretty easy for you to answer, but it's not a bad idea to just sit there and think about that, get the critical thinking going. But here's my works cited, and I really appreciate you for sitting here listening to this, spending 15 minutes with me today, and yeah, thank you.